Stingray.
It's July 11th, 2024, and I'm with World War II veteran, Mr. John Jeckovich. And we're reading his book called Their Mother's Sons. And primarily, at this section, the last 3 or 4 days, we're at, speaking of going to combat, primarily the Battle of the Bulge. And we're on chapter 8 right now, and 207, and it's titled Gene, Sonnetas, and Bombers. And this is when Mr. Jeckovich was at several Army bases training as a teenager to get ready for combat. Now he took the troop ship over.
What?
Your American flag has just fell. Okay, well, has nothing to do with Mr. Jeckovich. It was a technical error. Well, that was fun. Okay, so Mr. Jeckovich took the troop ship over, landed in Wales, and now he's in extended training in Wales before he goes to the front line, which is going to be titled as that particular war is the Battle of the Bulge, and this will be the last war primarily in the Europe theater. Hitler has the last chance of putting on. Before I start, Mr. Jeckovich, you're looking very chipper today.
Yeah.
How you doing? Good?
Good. 4209295.
All right. I didn't even have to ask the passcode. You gave me your dog tag number, and I'm ready to go. I'm going to start reading your book. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
Go ahead, read it, Dave. Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. All right. Around December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed, and that's exactly the reason why the Americans got into World War II. Up to this point, they were just supplying tremendous amounts of money and ammunition to help fight Hitler. You were 16 years old when Pearl Harbor was bombed. Do you remember where you were when you were notified that Pearl Harbor?
I was at 7 in the afternoon. I was skating on the creek.
You were skating on Gill Creek.
Yeah.
And the word spread fast that there are Navy ships were bombed.
Yep.
And that
Pearl Harbor,
and that got everyone involved in it, didn't it?
Yep.
At the time of Mr. Jeckovich's life, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, he was skating on Gill Creek. And he was still a teenager, 16 years old. And at this time, like most teenagers, Mr. Jeckovich's lives and days should have been filled with innocent adventure of love and lessons of the workday world. Yet they're fighting in the most primitive conditions possible and the bloody landscape. A few years after that, Mr. Jeckovich was in the Battle of Bulge and the bloody landscape of France, Belgium, Italy, Austria. And also they were fighting in the Coral Islands of the Pacific. Are you happy, Mr. Jeckovich, that you were in a European theater?
Oh, yeah, I didn't want to go to the Pacific, no.
You didn't want to go to the Pacific?
I didn't want to go to the Pacific, no.
So that went your way.
Yeah.
Mr. Jeckovich answered a call with many other teenagers to save the world from the two most powerful and ruthless military machines ever assembled. Instruments of conquest in hands and fascist maniacs. Hitler was a fascist maniac.
Yeah.
Fascist maniac. They faced great odds in a late start, but they did not protest. So none of your young soldiers that were 17 and 18, many of them lied about their age to get into the service because they wanted to serve their country.
Yep.
But their whole goal was to keep Hitler out of America and basically save the world, because they knew the guy was a damn lunatic. And these young soldiers faced great odds because they got in a late start, But these young teenagers, they did not protest. They succeeded on every front. These young teenagers won the war and they saved the world. For example, in the Battle of Bulge, these young teenagers had no experience at all, and they were caught in the middle of heavy, heavy fire. That was the 106th Division. Tell us what happened to 106th Division.
They got slaughtered. They got wiped out.
Slaughtered. Young boys.
Wiped out.
6 months ago, they were playing baseball and football.
Yeah.
Slaughtered. But eventually they succeeded on every front. And none of them protested. All the kids volunteered and went. All went to war happily. They succeeded on every front. They won the war and then they saved the world. They came home to a joyous and short-lived celebrations and immediately took the task of rebuilding their lives in a world that they wanted. They become married in record numbers, gave birth to another distinctive generation, which we know today as baby boomers. A grateful nature made it possible for them to attend college. Well, Mr. Jeckovich greatly wanted to attend college. Prior to the war, he could not afford to go to college. But after the war, he had a VA with a pay
Yeah,
for.
16.
What's that?
Public Law 16.
Yeah, he was able to go to college for free, but he could not. Mr. Jeckovich had to stay home and support his family. His family needed him for support. College wasn't in the cards. Even though he could have went for free, he stayed home to support his family. That was the only option he really had. As now, they're all, and so, Mr. Jeckovich, where did you go to work right after got out of the war? What factory?
Kimberly-Clark.
Kimberly-Clark, correct. Now, Kimberly-Clark, what did you do at Kimberly-Clark? Tell us a little bit.
Mostly, I started out as a production worker.
And then, how many years did you work at Kimberly-Clark?
35.
35 years. Mr. Jeckovich.
I'm ashamed to say.
What's that?
I'm ashamed to say.
You're not ashamed to say you did your service. We'll get to that part in a little bit. But you did a great job at Kimberly-Clark. Did you miss any days of work?
Nope.
Not one day?
I had two businesses I started. I never lost.
Yeah. And didn't you get injured once at work with a broken arm?
Yeah.
And you continued to fill out the day because that was your obligation, and then you walked home, correct?
Yep.
And did you take a car to work?
No, I never drove. I always walked. Never drove my car to work.
So, tell us about the machines you worked on and the conditions of Kimberly-Clark.
Well, the machine was about a mile long. It started at pulp in Surrey. It wound up as paper on the other end. Different weights, 50, 60 pound, 30 pound. A lot of them were paper they could print on both sides. That was a big novelty then.
Glossy paper for magazines.
Yeah, they could print on both sides.
Yeah. And did many World War II veterans work at Kimberly-Clark?
I wouldn't say too many, no.
But there was World War II veterans there.
Yeah.
I see. And Kimberly-Clark, after Mr. Jeckovich put in 35 years out of service. And what type of work did you do there? You said it was called shift work. Tell us what shift work is. I don't know.
Shift work, you work 3 shifts.
Tell us.
You work the midnights one week, the days the next week, and afternoons.
Okay. And getting back to Kimberly-Clark, after Mr. Jeckovich worked there for 35 long years to take care of his family.
Didn't miss a day.
And didn't miss a day. Damn good worker. Didn't miss a day. What was the temperature in that place when you worked?
About 70, 65, 70.
Wasn't it hot? Were there some
It was hot because they had those big dryers to dry that paper.
Wasn't that well over 100?
There was a mile-long dryer that were driving that paper.
Okay. Well, after Mr. Jeckovich put in 35 long years, Kimberly-Clark did a fancy maneuver. to the VA, to the World War II veterans and Mr. Jeckovich, through a fancy maneuver, which is much more complicated, what I'm about to say. They switched it over to a Canadian company, and a Canadian company filed bankruptcy. So as a result, all these young World War II vets that put their life into Kimberly-Clark, 35 years of service, were all shuttered. They all did not receive one dime in pension. And through the tricky legal maneuver of Kimberly-Clark.
Yeah, they're still fighting it.
Well, shame on Kimberly-Clark. And now it's many, many years later, and a lot of people know, and Kimberly-Clark is exposed to their dirty tricks they pulled on the World War II veterans. For example, on all my properties, everyone that works for me is instructed never to buy a Kimberly-Clark paper product. Nothing at all. That's been going on for years.
Now, what was this now?
I don't allow none of my properties to have Kimberly-Clark products since your treatment. So occasionally, through a communication problem, one of my properties or offices, I'll come in and I'll find a Kimberly-Clark product. And I take that product, that paper product, I'll throw it right in the garbage. And sometimes if I find a product that's made by Kimberly-Clark, and if I'm in a real feisty mood, I'll take that paper product to the back lot, to my back parking lot of my office, and I'll piss on it.
Yeah.
Done that more than once, I'll probably do it again. So it's an absolute shame that you put your heart and soul into World War II openly and gladly, and then you work for a company like Kimberly-Clark, and they did this to World War II veterans. It'll never be forgotten in my book, never.
Wow.
But the interesting point that many of these World War II veterans, like Mr. Jeckovich, have a lot of stories to tell now, but they never set it up to now. Mr. Jeckovich is knocking on the door of 100, so his mind is like a library of all the things, and he's finally saying it now. But this is a very interesting fact for everyone to remember, that these World War II vets are exceptionally modest for the most part. They have many stories to tell, and many cases they have never, Mr. Jeckovich and others have never told before. Because in a deep sense, and Mr. Jeckovich has said this many times, listen to this, because in a deep sense, they didn't think what they were doing was that special because everyone else was doing it. Didn't you say that?
Yeah.
Like, why are we talking about you? Everyone else did it. But it was very special what the World War II vets did. Didn't you say, oh, why are you doing this or why are you saying that? Because it's just like everyone did it.
Everyone did it. That's what you did.
Just like your beautiful 900-page book you wrote. You said, oh, there's 1,000 books. Well, that's a great accomplishment. And I commend you for that. So, on a lighter note, we're going to keep on reading before Mr. Jeckovich got into the actual combat, and we're talking about Jean Rowland Young. Jean Rowland Young is a young lady he met at Haverfordwest. He had 3 girlfriends during World War II. We have accounted for 2 of them already. We have accounted for Anne Mahaney, and we have accounted for Renee. The only one we haven't accounted for yet, was able to discuss personally with, or find out what happened to, was Jean Rowland Young. And her father was a mayor of Haverfordwest at the time. And in fact, with the help of the Daily Mail, a large newspaper in England, they wrote a full-page story about Mr. Jeckovich in the search for Jean Rowland Young, but no luck as of yet. We'll continue, and I hope within a week we'll come to an answer. Here we go. As we entered the lounge, I was impressed with the huge log fire blazing in the mammoth wall-sized fireplace. It felt warm and very friendly, and where we could just sit and stare into its radiant glow. We were escorted into the dining room. It was large and spacious, and I was immediately drawn to the old wooden beam ceiling. The beams must have been 3 feet across and were huge, with a great deal of atmosphere and nuance to the dining room. This is at the Pembroke House. You remember the Pembroke House?
Yeah.
I heard they had some really good food there. What'd you have?
Well, we had roast lamb. The trimmings with the roast lamb. And the dessert was Irish mulligan pudding.
How'd you like that?
That was good. That was good, yeah.
All right. Our table seated 2, and Jean began looking at the menu that was placed before us. "What would you like?" she inquired, and as she polished her nails, fingered the large-sized menu card. "You order," I replied. "I don't believe I understand the menu description." She smiled and said she would surprise me. As she ordered and as I watched her, she began to think of what Providence had brought both of us together. It looked like another match made in heaven. Were you thinking seventh heaven? The seventh heaven. Jean was attractive, sincere, and warm-hearted, and both of us seemed attracted to one another. I was fascinated with her Welsh accent and just beginning to appreciate and understand it fully. There was nothing pretentious or boastful about her. Being the mayor's daughter, although insignificant in worldly affairs, was a big thing in people's minds in a small town like Haverfordwest. Mm-hmm. It was the last thing on her mind. I'm sure she must have been held in high esteem by the townsfolk. But the very fact that she was the mayor's daughter, it did not sway her one way or the other, which was one of her attributes of hers as I slowly coming around to admire her greatly. Another of her low-key presentations of her talent for music and subtle ways she disguised its appearance. I still felt uneasy regarding the episode we had about it several nights ago, and I was still greatly reluctant to approach the subject. Even though I felt she had recovered from the experience sufficiently, I knew she felt that I could help her in this regard, but I was at my wit's end trying to come to some fruitful conclusion in a way that would be beneficial to her. She wanted music to be so much part of her life, yet there was no realistic solution in how to attain this goal. Her parents were unaware of her dilemma, and even though they knew there was no possible way they could aid her financially for a higher schooling she so desperately desired. There were no governmental aid available for talented students such as Jean, and if no one recognized of her predicament, she would be just another statistic, lost in the gray area of nonconformity. The meal she had ordered arrived, and she looked at me in a wondrous anticipation as I scanned the various plates and platters. The food was attractively displayed, although most of its contents looked unfamiliar. I said something complimentary regarding it, and then asked Jean what she ordered. She listed it briefly. There you go, tender lamb, you got a great memory, a delicate green curry sauce, and poached sea bass. I wondered at her culinary and creative talents, only to mention them briefly, saving it for another day. And then there was the most exotic baked goods imaginable, most I had never tasted before. As I sat there, hello, take care. As I sat there and gorged myself on the most delicious mouth-watering selections presented, Gene asked me to partake of their puddings. Did you like their puddings?
Yes.
Okay. There were several to choose from: leaven, plum, rice, tapioca. As it turned out, tapioca became my favorite, with the rice pudding coming in a strong second choice. Minutes?
9.
One of the friendly servers, who attired in a headscarf and a frilly white apron, gave us a short history of the evolution of pudding. The earliest puddings, according to this friendly server, was a 14th century sausages, which evolved over the next 200 years and gradually turned into a form of dessert, boiled in a bag or cloth. Then, as the process became more sophisticated, the pudding was placed in a buttered bowl covered with cloth and steam. Finally, in our own times, it baked, chilled, coated with mixture of eggs, sugar, and scalded milk, and invariably became a custard. She concluded by saying that all the puddings take a long time to cook, are warm, very filling, and inexpensive. She also warned us not to eat too much of one kind, as it would be too filled to savor the remaining assortment. We both thanked her for her historical personal touch to our meal and came away both enlightened and pleasantly informed on the history of pudding in England and Wales. I complimented Jean on her excellent selection of the dining place and the outstanding meal she had selected. We must have sat and enjoyed our meal for several hours. Being in her company added further to the pleasantness of a memorable Sunday afternoon. Before we left the dining room, Jean succumbed to the same ritual all females fall prey to, retiring to the ladies' room to readjust themselves and freshen up. Freshen up. She returned smiling, and I watched her as she approached our table. She walked gracefully, somewhat poised, and her figure was flattering and most inviting. As she sat down, I got a whiff of her freshly applied perfume, and I acknowledged it by smiling slightly and looking approvingly at her. We sat there for several minutes, waiting for the change from the dinner check. I asked Jean what was an appropriate tip or gratuity, and she replied usually 8% of the total cost of dinner. I asked her for help in sorting out my money, and she cheerfully assisted. All in all, it was a pleasant Sunday, and I enjoyed it immensely. Jean played an important role in its enjoyment. With that, we departed the dining room and walked out onto the sidewalk. It was still fairly early in the day. I asked Jean what she wanted to do now. She took my arm and said that we should walk for a while and take in the sights. The sights and sounds of a small town like Haverfordwest were slight and modest. The absence of any automobiles was still quite noticeable to me, as there were a great number of people riding on bicycles. The town itself appeared like no other town. Minutes?
6.
I had seen before him with his quaint little stores dispensing every imaginable item. There was much open-air viewing of the merchandise displayed in the front of the stores, with no attendant in a prominent sight. When you made your purchase, you went inside the store. If you found a clerk or an owner, you paid them directly. If no attendant could be found, you simply left the correct amount in a little pewter bowl provided and departed with your merchandise. How do you think that would go today?
Right.
In Wales, if you're shopping someone's store, if you can't find the attendant, there's a little pewter ball, and you just leave the money in there and then you leave. How do you think that would work today? Huh?
It wouldn't work.
Wouldn't work. Yeah, you're right. It wouldn't work. And I'll bet you those little shops in Haverfordwest on the honor system, they don't lose one dime.
Yeah.
I'll bet you.
I wonder if they got the honor system there yet.
I don't know, I hope so. I know we can't do it here. As we walked, the closest of Jean aroused my inner desires, and the clicking of her pumps on the pavement only reinforced it all the more. We approached what seemed to be a theater or cinema with its quaint, small, marquee announcing Mrs. Minerva, and playing here today, tomorrow, on exclusive tour, not to be seen again for several months. I did not tell Jean that I'd seen the movie with Ann 6 months ago to the day. And Miss Minerva.
Mr. Murdo, yeah.
She became excited at the thought of seeing her favorite movie star, Greer Garson, again, and asked if we might go see it. I smiled at her childlike glee to attend the movie and stood in line to obtain the tickets.
Greer Garson, Walter Pigeon.
What?
Greer Garson and Walter Pigeon.
Oh, wow. As I purchased the tickets, I discovered the preferred seats were in the balcony, just opposite the theater order. Climbing the stairway to the balcony, I noticed that Jean's small buttocks, wow, and well-shaped legs and ankles, wow.
What's that? What happened?
I once again, I noticed Jean's small buttocks and well-shaped legs and ankles. Yeah, here we go. We came in the middle of the news showing the fighting in Horgen Forest, as well as the bomber raids on the cities in Germany. The elder gentleman escorted us to the seats. As we settled into them, I noticed the balcony was less than a quarter full. As a matter of fact, there are perhaps only 20 people scattered about the darkened semicircular room. How's that movie? Was the quality of the film good?
Black and white.
Black and white. Okay, I'm glad I
All
asked you
black
that.
and white.
All black and white. Okay. After a while, with special attention starting, I put my arm around Jean's shoulder with the other hand in mine, and we began stroking it gently. Oh boy. She turned and smiled, and then became entrapped with the movie. Having seen Miss Minerva several times, already my interest and attentions were directed into different channels. Oh boy. Blank, blank, blank. Can't read that. Won't read that. I can't read some of this. This is damn X-rated, man. I can't read this. Okay, let me move. Well, how many minutes we got left here?
1 in 30 seconds.
After several more futile attempts in various segments of her anatomy, oh man, I'm bouncing right back into it. I got bouncing right back into it. I skipped 2 paragraphs.
Skip.
I gave up in despair and concentrated on the movie. Thank God.
Oh, thank God.
Strangely, I can recall the part and relate them to the events at the time with Anne. It was interesting to do this, to be movie unfolded, and my recall was almost 100% on almost every event. Minutes?
1 in 10 seconds.
10 seconds?
1 minute and 10 seconds.
After a while, the news trailer came back on the spot, and we had come in on, and I asked Jean if she wanted to sit there another session on the main attraction. She quirked up her nose and rose from her seat, waiting for me to exit the rows of seats. Walking out of the theater, she saw it was dark outside as we stood in front deciding what to do next. The air was becoming cooler, and I suggested hot tea as a refresher. We walked for a while and came to Castle Square. Minutes?
30 seconds.
On the same side of the street was Castle Hotel and Lounge. Nestling in the foreground was a magnificent, awe-inspiring, majestic Norman castle. As we entered the lounge, we could see that it was furnished as a medieval castle might have been. Okay,
10 seconds.
okay, well, that went out there.
All right, well, it run out.
Okay,
And